All right, are you ready for some serious mind games?
Huh?
You chose Robert Greene's 48 Laws of Power for this deep dive. And let me tell you, this book is, well, a treasure trove of historical examples and strategic insights into how power really works.
It's a fascinating book.
But before we get started, I think it's important to note we're dissecting these laws to understand them, not necessarily to endorse every single one.
Exactly. Think of it like learning how a powerful engine works. You don't have to become a race car driver to appreciate the mechanics.
Yeah. Yeah.
Perfect analogy. Okay, so let's jump into the first three laws, which all deal with subtlety and maneuvering and power dynamics. Law 1, never outshine the master. This one's about knowing your place, especially when you're dealing with someone in a position of authority.
It's more than just being respectful. It's about understanding that those in power often perceive, well, anyone who outshines them as a potential threat. Remember Nicolas Fouquet, Louis XIV's finance minister? He threw this extravagant party at his lavish chateau, Vaux-le-Vicomte, trying to impress the king. Yeah, talk about going overboard.
Yeah.
Didn't he practically bankrupt himself trying to create a mini Versailles?
He did, and it backfired spectacularly. Louis XIV saw Fouquet's display of wealth and taste as a direct challenge to his authority, a violation of what's called lèse-majesté, basically insulting the king by appearing to be his equal or even superior.
So it wasn't just about being jealous of Fouquet's party. It was like a direct attack on his power as the king.
Exactly. And the consequences were swift. Louis XIV imprisoned Fouquet, effectively ending his career and making a very public example of what happens when you, threaten the king's supremacy.
So what could Fouquet have done differently?
Instead of trying to, outdo the king, he could have focused on showcasing his loyalty and subtly highlighting Louis XIV's superior taste and magnificence. Imagine if he had presented his chateau as a tribute to the king's vision, a smaller-scale reflection of Versailles.
So instead of competing, he could have positioned himself as a devoted follower, amplifying the king's glory. That's clever. Have you ever been in a situation where you had to kind of downplay your own achievements to avoid stepping on someone's toes? It's a delicate dance, isn't it?
It certainly is.
Yeah.
Now let's move on to Law 2. Never put too much trust in friends. Learn how to use enemies. This one seems counterintuitive, but Greene argues that enemies can actually be more useful than friends, at least in the game of power.
It's like that saying, keep your friends close and your enemies closer. Greene uses the example of Henry Kissinger, who actually befriended some of his staunchest critics. That takes some serious guts.
Kissinger wasn't just being nice.
Right.
He understood the power of knowing your enemy. By building relationships with his opponents, even those who had threatened him, he could gain valuable insights into their thinking, anticipate their moves, and potentially neutralize their attacks.
It's like playing a game of chess. The more you understand your opponent's strategy, the better you can plan your own moves. Greene also highlights Mao Zedong's clever use of the Japanese invasion during the Chinese Civil War. Instead of seeing it as a defeat, Mao used it as an opportunity to train his troops against a formidable enemy.
Mao understood that even the most challenging situations can present opportunities for growth and advancement. He turned a disadvantage into a strategic advantage, ultimately strengthening his position.
So it's about reframing our perspective on conflict, seeing it not just as a threat, but as a potential catalyst for learning and strategic maneuvering. Have you ever found yourself unexpectedly benefiting from a rivalry or a challenging situation?
I think we all have, in one way or another. Now, on to Law 3, which is all about deception. Conceal your intentions. Greene argues that appearances can be deceiving, and those who can master the art of concealing their true motives, well, they often wield the most power.
It's about being strategic and knowing when to hold your cards close to your chest. Greene uses the example of Ninon de l'Enclos, a French courtesan who was a master of social manipulation.
Oh, a fascinating woman.
She advised a love-struck marquis on how to win the heart of a countess by pretending to be uninterested and even making her jealous.
Ninon understood the power of psychology. By creating a sense of scarcity and playing hard to get, she effectively manipulated the countess's emotions, making her more desirable to the marquis. It's a classic example of how understanding human psychology can be used to, influence behavior.
It's like creating an illusion. The more mysterious and unattainable you appear, the more desirable you become. Greene also shares the story of Otto von Bismarck, who famously said, "Politics is the art of the possible." Bismarck was a master of deception, publicly advocating for peace while secretly maneuvering Prussia towards war and unification.
Bismarck understood that appearances can be incredibly deceiving. By lulling his opponents into a false sense of security, he was able to achieve his objectives without triggering a premature confrontation.
So it's about recognizing that power dynamics are often like a game of chess, where strategic maneuvering and calculated deception can be just as effective as brute force. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where you needed to conceal your true intentions to achieve a goal? It's a delicate balance, knowing when to be open and when to be more strategic.
It is, and it's a skill that can be incredibly valuable both in our personal and professional lives.
All right, let's move on to a law that emphasizes the power of silence. Law 4. Always say less than necessary. Greene argues that talking too much can be a liability, making you vulnerable to attack.
It's about recognizing the power of mystery and allowing others to, well, fill the silence with their own interpretations.
Right.
Greene illustrates this point with La Fontaine's fable, The Tiger, the Ass, and the Fox. The ass, by talking too much and revealing his guilt, becomes the scapegoat and is punished, while the more cunning fox, who understands the power of silence, escapes unscathed.
So it's not just about keeping secrets. It's about being strategic with your communication, choosing your words carefully and knowing when to hold back. It's like that saying, silence is golden. Didn't Louis XIV use silence as a tool to maintain control over his court?
He did. Louis understood that silence creates an aura of authority and mystery. It makes people uncomfortable, leaving them guessing and struggling to interpret, your thoughts and intentions.
It's like a power move. The less you say, the more powerful you seem. Can you think of situations in your own life where saying less might have been the more powerful choice?
Oh, we've all been there, right? Now let's switch gears and talk about the importance of image. Law 5. So much depends on reputation. Guard it with your life. Greene argues that your reputation is one of your most valuable assets and that protecting it should be a top priority.
It's like that saying, your reputation precedes you. Greene uses the example of P.T. Barnum, who understood the power of a well-crafted image. He went from being a struggling businessman to becoming a household name by carefully cultivating a larger-than-life persona.
Barnum knew how to play the media, create buzz, and shape public perception. He wasn't just selling tickets to his shows, he was selling an experience, a fantasy.
And then there's Mata Hari, the exotic dancer who became a global sensation.
Oh, yeah.
Her carefully crafted persona, even more than her dancing skills, made her a legend.
Mata Hari understood that in the realm of power and influence, perception is often reality. She created an aura of mystery and intrigue that captivated the public's imagination.
So it's about being aware of how you're perceived by others and taking steps to cultivate a positive image that aligns with your goals. How do you think people perceive you? And is that the image you want to project? Something worth thinking about, isn't it?
It is, and it's a process that requires constant awareness and adjustment, especially in today's fast-paced, image-driven world.
All right, let's move on to a law that emphasizes the power of action. Law 9. Win through your actions, never through argument. Greene argues that actions speak louder than words and that getting bogged down in arguments can actually be counterproductive.
It's about focusing on results, not rhetoric. Greene shares a story about an engineer who insisted on using his design for a mast despite warnings from experienced soldiers. His arrogance and need to be right led to disastrous consequences.
That's a great example of how intellectual arrogance can be a liability, especially when it comes to matters of, practical experience. It's a good reminder to listen to those who have been there and done that, even if their opinions challenge your own.
Absolutely. Greene also discusses the downfall of Lola Montez, a courtesan who rose to a position of power but ultimately self-destructed through her reliance on arguments and, volatile behavior.
Oh, she sounds like a real drama queen. It seems like she let her emotions get the best of her, and it ultimately cost her everything. It's a reminder that composure and strategic action are essential in navigating the complexities of power.
Exactly. So, how can we apply this law to our own lives?
Yeah.
It's about being mindful of our communication style and choosing actions over empty words to achieve our goals.
It's about being a doer, not just a talker. Now, let's talk about the company we keep. Law 10. Infection. Avoid the unhappy and unlucky. Greene argues that negativity is contagious and that associating with chronically unhappy people can drag us down and hinder our success.
He even references Julius Caesar, who famously said he avoided people with a, quote, lean and hungry look, because they seemed likely to harbor resentment and negative energy.
Caesar understood that emotions are contagious. and that the people we surround ourselves with can have a profound impact on our own outlook and effectiveness.
He contrasted this with the positive influence of associating with successful and optimistic people, using Napoleon's relationship with Talleyrand as an example.
Napoleon, despite his own, rough edges, recognized Talleyrand's social grace and political savvy. And by keeping him close, he benefited from those positive qualities. It's a reminder to choose our companions wisely, isn't it?
Yeah.
Do you have people in your life who drain your energy, or conversely, inspire and uplift you? It's an interesting question to consider.
It is, and it's an important one, because the people we surround ourselves with can have a significant impact on our own well-being and success.
Okay, let's dive into a law that explores the power of illusion. Law 32. Play to people's fantasies. Greene argues that people are drawn to narratives that offer escape, comfort, or a sense of meaning, especially in times of uncertainty or hardship.
People crave, they crave a sense of, meaning and belonging, especially when they feel lost or insecure. Greene argues that those who can tap into this desire and offer a compelling narrative, they can create a loyal following that will enhance their power.
He uses the example of the charlatans who flourished through Europe during the 16th and 17th century.
Oh, fascinating.
These individuals exploited the decline of organized religion and the rise of science to create cults around themselves.
They understood the power of playing on people's hopes and anxieties. They offered a sense of belonging and purpose, creating elaborate rituals and adopting titles that evoked religious authority. Think Franz Mesmer, for example.
Mesmer was a pioneer in the study of animal magnetism.
Yes.
He created a theatrical atmosphere for his treatments, using music, dim lighting, and even a mesmeric tub to heighten the sense of mystery and allure.
He understood that spectacle and showmanship can be incredibly effective in attracting a devoted following.
These examples highlight the power of creating a compelling narrative and tapping into people's emotional needs. It's a strategy that can be used for good or ill, depending on the intentions of the leader.
Absolutely. Now, let's shift gears and talk about the importance of decisive action. Law 28, enter action with boldness. This law is all about projecting confidence and taking risks. Greene argues that hesitation and timidity signal weakness, while bold action inspires respect and admiration.
It's like that saying, fortune favors the bold. Greene uses the story of Vasco Núñez de Balboa, a Spanish explorer who faced numerous challenges but ultimately achieved fame and fortune through his bold and decisive actions.
Balboa was a risk-taker who was willing to defy conventional wisdom and pursue his ambitions relentlessly. He didn't let fear hold him back.
Balboa was the first European to reach the Pacific Ocean from the New World. It took immense courage and determination to achieve that.
It's a remarkable feat. This law reminds us that while careful planning is important, there are times when we need to act decisively, even in the face of uncertainty.
It's about trusting our instincts and taking calculated risks. Have you ever had a moment where you just knew you had to go for it, even though it felt scary?
I think those moments of boldness are often the ones that define our lives. Speaking of taking risks, let's move on to Law 29. Plan all the way to the end. This law emphasizes the importance of thinking strategically and anticipating potential obstacles before taking action.
It's about playing chess, not checkers. Greene uses the story of the Sufi, the king, and the surgeon to illustrate this point.
Oh, an interesting story.
The Sufi advises the king to, quote, never begin anything until you have reflected what will be the end of it.
Right.
This advice ultimately saves the king's life when a surgeon, who is bribed to assassinate him, realizes the folly of participating in the plot.
It's a reminder that impulsive actions can have unintended consequences, and that careful planning is essential for achieving, long-term success.
It's about thinking several moves ahead, like a grandmaster.
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever started a project or embarked on a venture without fully considering the potential consequences?
I think we've all been there. It's a valuable reminder to slow down, think strategically, and consider the long-term implications of our actions.
Okay, let's talk about a law that encourages us to make success look easy. Law 30. Make your accomplishments seem effortless. This law is all about concealing the effort and strategy behind your achievements, creating an aura of mystery and inevitability around your actions.
Greene uses the example of Senno Rikyu, a 16th century Japanese tea master who emphasized naturalness and simplicity in the tea ceremony. Rikyu believed that true beauty lay in the subtle and understated.
It's about making it look easy, even when it's not. It's like a magician performing a complex illusion. The audience is more impressed if it seems effortless.
Exactly. Greene points out that concealing your effort can also make you seem more powerful and intimidating.
It's about creating a sense of awe and wonder around your accomplishments. Have you ever worked really hard on a project and then downplayed your efforts, making it seem like it was no big deal?
It's a subtle but effective strategy. It's about projecting an image of competence and mastery.
All right, let's move on to a law that's all about controlling the narrative. Law 31. Control the options. Get others to play with the cards you deal. This law encourages us to become masters of framing choices in a way that subtly guides others towards the outcome we desire.
Greene argues that people often believe they are making independent choices, when in fact their options have been carefully curated and limited by those in power.
It's like setting up a chessboard in a way that gives you a strategic advantage from the very beginning of the game.
Exactly. Greene uses the example of Ivan the Terrible, who strategically left Moscow and retreated to a rural village, forcing the boyars to choose between accepting his absolute rule or facing the potential chaos of a leaderless state.
By creating a situation where the boyars felt they had no other choice, Ivan effectively gained the power he desired.
This law highlights the importance of understanding your opponent's needs and fears, using those insights to frame choices in a way that subtly pushes them towards the outcome you desire.
It's about thinking strategically and anticipating your opponent's moves. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where you felt like you had a choice, but in reality the options were carefully limited?
It happens more often than we realize. It's a powerful reminder to be aware of the subtle ways in which our choices can be influenced by those in positions of power.
All right, let's move on to a law that encourages us to become keen observers of human behavior. Law 33, discover each man's thumbscrew. This law is all about identifying and exploiting people's weaknesses and vulnerabilities.
Greene argues that everyone has a thumbscrew, a point of leverage that can be used to exert pressure and control. It could be a secret fear, a hidden desire, or a deep-seated insecurity.
Greene uses the fascinating example of Count Victor Lustig, a con man who was a master at identifying and exploiting people's weaknesses.
Oh, what a character.
Lustig, who once sold the Eiffel Tower twice, had an uncanny ability to read people.
Lustig realized that people are most susceptible to manipulation when their emotions are heightened. He preyed on their greed, their insecurity, and their need for validation.
It's a reminder that we all have vulnerabilities and that we need to be aware of those who might seek to exploit them.
Absolutely. It's a powerful argument for self-awareness and emotional intelligence.
Okay, let's talk about the importance of projecting confidence. Law 34. Be royal in your own fashion. Act like a king to be treated like one. This law encourages us to exude an air of authority and self-assurance, even in the face of adversity.
Greene argues that people are naturally drawn to those who exude confidence and leadership.
It's about faking it till you make it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Projecting an image of success, even if you don't feel entirely confident yet.
He cites the example of Christopher Columbus, who, despite facing numerous setbacks, always maintained an air of confidence and determination. Columbus believed in his vision, and his unwavering self-belief ultimately inspired others to follow him.
Columbus's story reminds us that belief is contagious. By projecting confidence and acting as if you are worthy of success, you can attract opportunities and influence others to see you in a more favorable light. Have you ever noticed how some people just seem to command respect, even if they don't have a formal title or position of authority?
Absolutely. It's about the energy you project, the way you carry yourself, and the confidence you exude.
Okay, let's explore a law that emphasizes the importance of timing. Law 35. Master the art of timing. This one's about recognizing that timing is everything, particularly when it comes to matters of power and influence.
Greene argues that rushing into action prematurely can lead to disaster, while patiently waiting for the right moment can yield far greater rewards.
It's about understanding that power is dynamic, constantly ebbing and flowing. You need to know when to act and when to wait.
He uses the example of Joseph Fouché, a French politician who navigated the turbulent years of the French Revolution and the Napoleonic era with remarkable skill. Fouché was a master of reading the political climate and adjusting his allegiances accordingly.
He was a master of reinvention, shifting his political stances as needed to remain in a position of power.
Exactly. This law reminds us that patience is a virtue, particularly in the realm of power. It's about recognizing that there's a time for action and a time for observation, and knowing the difference can be crucial for success.
Have you ever missed an opportunity because you acted too hastily? Or conversely, achieved a goal because you waited for the perfect moment?
I think we've all had those experiences. It's a valuable reminder to be mindful of timing and to cultivate patience when necessary.
Okay, let's dive into a law that encourages us to let go. Law 36. Disdain things you cannot have. Ignoring them is the best revenge. This law is all about recognizing the futility of dwelling on things that are beyond our control and focusing our energy on things we can influence.
Greene argues that by ignoring things we cannot have, we free ourselves from unnecessary frustration and resentment.
It's about choosing our battles wisely and recognizing that sometimes the most strategic move is to simply walk away.
He uses the example of King Henry VIII of England, who, after failing to secure an annulment from the Pope, decided to create his own church.
Henry didn't waste time begging or pleading. He took decisive action, creating a new reality that served his interests.
It's a powerful example of how to turn a setback into an opportunity. This law reminds us that we often give our power away by focusing on things we cannot change. By accepting what we cannot have and shifting our attention to areas where we can exert influence, we reclaim our power and increase our effectiveness.
It's about recognizing that sometimes the best revenge is a life well lived. Have you ever found yourself obsessing over something you couldn't have, only to realize later that it was a waste of time and energy?
We've all been there. It's a valuable reminder to let go of things we cannot control and to focus our attention on what we can create.
Okay, let's explore the power of visual imagery. Law 37. Create compelling spectacles. This law is all about understanding the power of visual persuasion, using imagery and symbolism to enhance your authority and create a lasting impression.
Greene argues that people are naturally drawn to spectacle and that carefully crafted visual displays can evoke powerful emotions and create a sense of awe and wonder.
It's about understanding that we live in a visually dominated world and that learning to harness the power of imagery can significantly enhance our influence.
He uses the example of Louis XIV, who masterfully used imagery and symbolism to enhance his authority.
The Sun King, what a brilliant use of symbolism. He created entire mythology around himself.
He understood that image is everything, and that projecting an aura of power and grandeur can be incredibly effective in shaping public perception.
This law reminds us that visual communication is incredibly powerful, and that by carefully crafting our image and using symbolism strategically, we can significantly enhance our influence.
Now, let's shift to a law that encourages us to understand the complexities of social conformity. Law 38. Think as you like, but behave like others. This law is all about recognizing the power of social norms and understanding that openly challenging those norms can be counterproductive.
It's about fitting in while maintaining your own individuality. Greene uses the example of Tommaso Campanella, a Renaissance thinker who managed to survive the Inquisition despite holding radical views that challenged the Church's authority.
Campanella understood that sometimes it's more strategic to conform outwardly while maintaining your own beliefs and principles privately.
It's a delicate balance. Finding that middle ground between fitting in and staying true to yourself. Have you ever felt the pressure to conform, even if it meant compromising your own values or beliefs?
It's a challenge we all face at some point. It's about choosing your battles wisely and recognizing that sometimes it's more strategic to blend in than to stand out.
Okay, let's explore a law that's a little bit mischievous. Law 39. Stir up waters to catch fish. This law is about understanding that sometimes creating a bit of chaos can work to your advantage.
Greene argues that by strategically provoking and unsettling your opponents, you can create opportunities to exploit their weaknesses. When people are feeling anxious or agitated, they're more likely to make mistakes.
It's about shaking things up and creating a bit of disruption. Greene uses the example of Haile Selassie, who deliberately provoked his rival, Ras Gugsa, into a rash action that led to his downfall.
Selassie understood that Gugsa was proud and easily provoked, so he played on those weaknesses to manipulate him into making a mistake.
It's a risky strategy, but it can be effective if you know how to play the game. Have you ever intentionally provoked someone to get a reaction? Or found yourself on the receiving end of that tactic?
It's a delicate game to play, but it can be incredibly effective in certain situations.
All right, let's move on to a law that encourages self-reliance. Law 40. Despise the free lunch. This law is all about recognizing the value of self-sufficiency and avoiding becoming dependent on others, particularly for financial support.
Greene argues that true power lies in self-reliance and that becoming indebted to others can undermine our independence and make us vulnerable to manipulation.
It's about maintaining your autonomy and avoiding situations where you might be beholden to someone else. Greene uses the example of the Medici family, who, despite their immense wealth, were careful to maintain their connections to the merchant class and to avoid appearing overly ostentatious.
The Medicis understood that true power lay not just in having money, but in having the respect and loyalty of the people. They cultivated an image of public service and generosity while simultaneously maintaining a firm grip on the reins of power.
So it's about recognizing that true power comes from within, and that becoming overly reliant on others can compromise our independence and make us vulnerable to exploitation. Have you ever felt pressure to accept a gift that came with strings attached? Or felt uncomfortable being indebted to someone?
It's a common dilemma, especially in professional settings. It's important to be aware of the potential consequences of accepting favors, especially from those who might seek to leverage that debt later on.
Okay, let's dive into a law that's all about forging your own path. Law 41. Avoid stepping into a great man's shoes. This law encourages us to create our own legacies rather than trying to live up to the expectations of our predecessors.
Greene argues that the shadow of a great man can be overwhelming, and that trying to replicate their achievements can lead to frustration and a sense of inadequacy.
It's about recognizing the power of originality and understanding that true greatness lies in forging our own destinies.
He uses the example of Alexander the Great, who, despite being the son of the legendary Philip II of Macedon, ultimately forged his own path to greatness.
Alexander understood that to truly shine, he needed to create his own legacy. He didn't want to be known simply as Philip's son. Have you ever felt the pressure to live up to someone else's expectations?
I think that's a common experience, especially for those of us who have had successful parents or mentors. It's about recognizing that we are all unique individuals with our own paths to follow.
All right, let's explore a law that's a bit Machiavellian. Law 42. Strike the shepherd and the sheep will scatter. This law is all about understanding group dynamics and recognizing that by targeting the leader, you can effectively neutralize the entire group.
Greene argues that groups are often reliant on a strong leader for direction and motivation.
Right.
By removing the leader, the group becomes disoriented and vulnerable.
It's like cutting off the head of a snake.
He uses the example of Caesar Borgia, who strategically targeted the leaders of opposing factions to disrupt their alliances and weaken their resistance.
Borgia understood that leadership is key, and that by removing the leader, you can effectively dismantle an entire organization or movement. It's a powerful, if somewhat ruthless, strategy.
It is, and it's one that's been used throughout history by those seeking to gain or maintain power.
Okay, let's shift gears to a law that emphasizes the importance of emotional intelligence. Law 43. Work on the hearts and minds of others. This law is all about recognizing that true persuasion involves more than just logic and reason. It requires an emotional connection.
Greene argues that by appealing to people's emotions and deepest desires, we can create a much stronger and more lasting bond.
It's about understanding that we're all emotional creatures, and that appealing to those emotions can be incredibly persuasive. Greene uses the example of Cyrus the Great, who strategically appealed to his soldiers' desires for both pleasure and freedom. By offering them a lavish banquet after a day of hard labor, he effectively won their loyalty and inspired them to follow him.
Cyrus understood that people are more likely to be persuaded by a message that resonates with their emotions and aspirations.
It's a powerful reminder to consider the emotional impact of our words and actions, especially when we're trying to persuade or influence others. Have you ever been swayed by an emotional appeal, or used an emotional appeal to persuade someone else?
I think we all have, at some point. It's a natural part of human communication.
Okay, let's talk about the power of mirroring. Law 44. Disarm and infuriate with the mirror effect. This law encourages us to understand that by subtly mimicking the behavior of others, we can disarm them and make them more receptive to our influence.
Greene argues that people are often flattered and disarmed when we reflect their behavior and opinions back to them.
It's about creating a sense of rapport and connection, making the other person feel like you're on the same wavelength.
Greene cites the example of Alcibiades, an Athenian general and politician who was a master of mirroring. Alcibiades would often adopt the customs and beliefs of the people he was trying to influence.
He understood that people are more likely to trust those who seem to share their values and perspectives.
This law reminds us that mirroring can be a powerful tool for building rapport and influencing others. By reflecting people's behavior and opinions back to them, we create a sense of connection and make them more receptive to our suggestions.
Have you ever noticed how people tend to mirror each other's body language when they're having a good conversation? It's a subconscious way of building rapport and signaling agreement.
It's a fascinating phenomenon, and it's one that we can use strategically to enhance our influence.
Okay, let's explore a law that encourages us to be mindful of the pace of change. Law 45. Preach the need for change, but never reform too much at once. This law is all about recognizing that people are often resistant to change, even when it's in their best interests.
Greene argues that gradual change is usually more effective than radical reform. People need time to adjust and adapt.
It's about recognizing that pushing too hard too fast can create resistance and backlash.
He used the example of Peter the Great of Russia, who, despite his ambitious plans to modernize Russia, was careful to implement his reforms gradually, recognizing that he needed to win over the support of the powerful boyar class.
Peter understood that change can be unsettling, and that people need time to adjust to new ideas and new ways of doing things.
It's a valuable reminder that even the most well-intentioned reforms can be met with resistance if they are perceived as too radical or disruptive.
Have you ever experienced resistance to change, either in your personal life or in a professional setting?
I think it's something we all encounter at some point. It's about understanding the psychology of change and recognizing that patience and gradualism are often essential for achieving lasting results.
Okay, let's talk about a law that encourages us to be relatable. Law 46. Never appear too perfect. This law is all about recognizing the importance of appearing human and approachable, even when you're in a position of power.
Greene argues that people are often intimidated by those who seem too perfect, and that by strategically revealing a minor flaw or weakness, we can make ourselves more likable and influential.
It's about letting people see that you're not superhuman, that you have flaws and vulnerabilities just like everyone else.
He uses the example of the Spartan general Pausanias, who alienated his allies by projecting an air of arrogance and superiority.
Pausanias forgot that even the most powerful leaders need to maintain a sense of humility and connection with those they lead.
It's a reminder that authenticity is often more appealing than perfection. Have you ever found yourself warming up to someone when they revealed a vulnerability or a flaw?
Absolutely. It makes them seem more human, more relatable.
Okay, let's explore a law that encourages us to be mindful of our limits. Law 47, do not go past the mark you aimed for. In victory, learn when to stop. This law is all about recognizing that knowing when to stop is just as important as knowing when to act.
It's about avoiding overreach and recognizing that pushing your luck too far can lead to a reversal of fortune.
Greene uses the example of the American punitive expedition into Mexico in 1916. The expedition, initially intended to capture Pancho Villa, ultimately turned into a protracted and unsuccessful campaign that achieved little and actually bolstered Villa's reputation.
It's a good example of how a mission can go off the rails when the original objectives are exceeded.
This law reminds us that knowing when to stop is essential for maintaining power and influence. It's about recognizing that sometimes the most strategic move is to walk away, leaving your opponents wondering what hit them.
It's a powerful reminder to be mindful of our limits and to avoid the temptation to overreach. Have you ever found yourself getting carried away with success, pushing beyond your original goals and ending up in a worse position than when you started?
It's a common trap, especially when we're feeling confident and invincible. This law reminds us to stay grounded and to recognize that even in victory, there's a point where it's wise to step back and consolidate our gains.
And finally, let's delve into the last law of the book. Law 48, assume formlessness. This law is all about embracing adaptability and fluidity, recognizing that rigidity and predictability can make us vulnerable in a constantly changing world.
Greene argues that the most successful individuals are those who can adapt to changing circumstances, remaining flexible and open to new ideas. He compares this to the nature of water, which can take on any shape and flow around any obstacle.
The beautiful metaphor, isn't it? Water is both powerful and yielding, capable of immense force, yet also able to adapt to its surroundings.
This law encourages us to cultivate that same sense of fluidity in our own lives, recognizing that clinging too tightly to a specific plan or strategy can be limiting.
It's about being open to new possibilities, willing to adjust our course as needed, and recognizing that the only constant is change. Have you ever found yourself clinging to a plan or an idea, even when it was clear that it wasn't working anymore?
We've all been there. It's a natural human tendency to want to hold on to what we know, even when it's no longer serving us. This law reminds us to embrace the unknown and to recognize that sometimes letting go is the most powerful move we can make.
So we've explored a lot of ground in this deep dive into Robert Greene's 48 Laws of Power. It's a thought-provoking book that offers insights into the often hidden dynamics of power and influence.
It is. And it's important to remember that the purpose of understanding these laws is not to become master manipulators, but rather to develop a deeper understanding of human behavior and to use that knowledge ethically and responsibly.
Exactly. Knowledge is power, but it's up to us to decide how we use it. As you navigate the complexities of your own life, remember to observe the subtle power plays around you. Who's mirroring whom? Who's playing to fantasies? Who's trying to control the options? And most importantly, how can you use this knowledge to achieve your goals while maintaining your integrity?
It's a lifelong journey of learning and discovery.
And that's the beauty of it. And it's a journey that, well, it can take us in some unexpected directions.
Sure.
Right. So as we wrap up this deep dive into the 48 Laws of Power, I think, it's important to remember that these laws are tools.
Right.
They can be used for good or for ill.
It all depends on the wielder.
Exactly.
So use this knowledge wisely, folks, and always remember, remember that the most powerful force of all is integrity.
Couldn't agree more.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the fascinating and sometimes a little bit Machiavellian world of power. Until next time, stay curious, stay engaged, and most importantly, stay powerful.